During a recent interview, pathologically lying malignant narcissist Donald Trump was asked why, when he was the sitting president and commander-in-chief, he didn't intervene during the January 6th insurrection. And his response will blow your mind. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. All right, folks, so Donald Trump was recently interviewed on Meet the Press. Meet the Press is a journalistic staple of, my God, basically the 20th and 21st century. You wouldn't know it from its most recent stewardship under Chuck Todd, who is a chronic both-sideser. He had a chronic allergy even to the follow-up question. And he just he wanted to be everybody's pal and create false moral equivalences. He retired recently, thank God, and Kristen Welker took his place. And she's not off to a great start either, if this interview with Donald Trump is any indication, because she seems to be prone to falling into the same trap that Chuck Todd did. But she did ask a really interesting question. This is a 2-minute clip. We are going to play most of it, even though it's relatively long, because it is important. And when she asked Donald Trump about his responsibility for January 6th, not as a political leader, but more importantly, as the sitting president and commander-in-chief of the U.S. Armed Forces.
I want to know who you called
By the way,
on that day.
Nancy Pelosi. I don't have. Why would I tell you that? Listen, Nancy Pelosi was in charge of security. She turned down 10,000 soldiers. If she didn't turn down the soldiers, you wouldn't have had January 6th.
Did you call military or law enforcement?
What?
Did you call military or law enforcement at the moment the Capitol was under attack?
I'm not going to tell you anything. Let me put it this way. I behaved so well. I did such a good job. Nancy Pelosi turned down 10,000 soldiers. If she didn't do that,
but
and now
Nancy
I understand.
Pelosi doesn't have the authority that
the
you
police
have as
testified
commander-in-chief, though.
Listen to me, Kristen. Listen to me. I understand that the police testified against her, the chief very strongly against her, Capitol Police, great people. They testified against her, and they burned all the evidence. Okay, they burned all the evidence. They destroyed all the evidence about Nancy Pelosi.
What do you say to people who wonder why you as commander-in-chief, you have authorities that Nancy Pelosi doesn't have as commander-in-chief?
No, she has authority over the
Why didn't
Capitol.
you send help in that moment, though?
Frankly, just so you understand, I assumed that she took care of it. She turned down.
So when you realized that the National Guard wasn't coming?
Well, you don't realize anything until quite a while. National Guard not coming. I asked it to be there 3 days in advance, and she turned it down.
She says that request was never officially made.
Oh,
just
stop
so
it.
you know.
Let me just tell you.
Let me ask you about pardons,
let me
Mr.
tell
President.
you. The mayor of D.C. gave us a letter saying that she turns it down. Okay, we have it. Nancy Pelosi also was asked, and she turned it down. The police commissioner
I'm talking about
Capitol
the day
Police,
of, though.
wait a minute.
Yep.
Capitol Police said that he wanted it, and Nancy Pelosi wouldn't accept it. She's responsible for January 6th.
Nancy Pelosi, Donald Trump says, is responsible for January 6th. Now, again, before we unpack all, although I will say, I did so well. I was such a good, Kristen, believe me, I was such a good boy. I was a very good boy. I got pats on the head and ice cream. I was such a good boy on January 6th. He's so pathetic. But before we unpack the ridiculousness of his answer, I do want to turn the mic over to former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who was asked about his comments there. And then again, we'll play this clip and we will unpack all of it together.
6th. He is blaming you for the attack on the Capitol that he instigated. Your response?
Well, the former occupant of the White House has always been about projection. He knows he's responsible for that, so he projects it onto others. His instigation of an insurrection, an assault on our Constitution the day we were supposed to approve and we did, the work of the Electoral College, the result of the Electoral College, the assault on the Capitol building, the assault on the Constitution, the assault on our democracy. Shame on him. However, he always projects. Now, he used to say, well, she turned down my troops. No, we begged him. Chuck Schumer and I begged him to send the troops again and again. His Secretary of the Army, McCarthy, another McCarthy, and acting Secretary of Defense just made it, oh, there are too many obstacles. It's bureaucratic. It's this. We can't do it. They know their exposure, so they project.
All right, folks. So that was a pretty succinct response here in which she denies, rejects, refutes several of the claims that Donald Trump made. But first and foremost, when it comes to authority, let's go to the D.C. National Guard website. And if you look at the About Us section, it says here very clearly, the D.C. National Guard is the only National Guard unit out of all the 54 states and territories which reports only to the president. Reports only to the president. So let's be very clear about this. Nancy Pelosi is not, has not, and has never been the president of the United States. She was Speaker of the House of Representatives. Very powerful, but not as powerful as the president of the United States, period. And she has no position in the military chain of command. The D.C. National Guard reports only to the sitting president, who at the time was Donald Trump. Nancy Pelosi did not have the authority to reject or to countermand an order from Donald Trump to deploy the National Guard troops. She wasn't involved. She is irrelevant. She is outside the chain of command. She certainly didn't have the authority to force him to negotiate. So what he's saying is just absolutely patently false. We used to believe in this country, again, or pay lip service, and I've mentioned this before, but it needs to be constantly reaffirmed, that with great power comes great responsibility. There is no position in this country more powerful on an individual basis than the sitting president of the United States, head of state, head of government, commander-in-chief of the world's mightiest military force, or the history's mightiest military force. When Donald Trump was president, he was the most powerful man on earth, with, as Kristen Welker points out, certain authorities that Speaker Pelosi doesn't have, never had. They're not equal. And the president of the United States is the figure who is ultimately the most responsible for national security. And again, that's not just Donald Trump, that's Joe Biden, it's every president, Democrat or Republican. There's no equivalence here. But he is, as she points out, projecting. He's trying to shirk responsibility. But the fact of the matter is, we know that he watched the insurrection unfold for 3 hours from the White House. He watched it live because it was being reported live. We saw the footage live. He was watching it on Fox News, and White House advisors and his own daughter, Ivanka Trump, were begging him to intervene. Fox News hosts were texting White House advisors saying he needs to stop this, he needs to intervene. Tucker Carlson even said it. Sean Hannity even said it. Everybody knew Trump was watching, and everybody was furious that he was engaging in dereliction of duty for watching it unfold for 3 hours. Donald Trump is factually, inarguably responsible for January 6th, infinitely more than Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or Mitch McConnell or anybody else. And even if he was right that in advance they rejected additional security measures because they thought it would be disruptive or because they thought that it was unnecessary, it still doesn't matter. At the end of the day, even if he's correct, when the day the insurrection happened, he had an affirmative duty to step up and crush it. President Washington, George Washington, our very first president, put down an insurrection. He actually was the only president who actually rode out on horseback with the troops to quell the insurrection. That is inherent to the duty of the sitting president of the United States. And for 3 hours, Donald Trump abdicated his duty as the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Armed Forces, as the figure who is ultimately responsible for national security. No matter how you slice it, no matter how you try to give him the benefit of the doubt, it all ends up ultimately to the same conclusion. Donald Trump and Donald Trump alone is responsible for the January 6th insurrection. He lied to his cultists for months about the election. He was the one who summoned them to the ellipse. He was the one who gave them a speech. He was the one who lied to them and riled them up, and he was the one who directed them to march on the Capitol. And then he sat and watched for 3 hours and did not avail himself of his military and law enforcement powers and authorities that were unique to him in his office. It was an abdication of duty. Disgusting that the leader of Christian values, the leader of personal accountability, consistently demonstrates that he has an allergy to both. Donald Trump constantly shirks responsibility. He is unfit for office because everything is always somebody else's fault. It's never his fault. He's a perfect, I did so well, Kristen. Kristen, I did so well. I was such a good boy. This man is truly pathetic. He's wrong on the facts, and everybody everywhere should be playing this clip and mocking him relentlessly for his stupidity and his cowardice.